Hello, I'm Matthew. This is the Kind Podcast. Today we are joined by the District Attorney of Memphis, Stephen Mulroy, and my brother, Jack Gould. How y'all doing today?
Just fine. Glad to be here.
Well, appreciate y'all coming. Excited for this conversation. We've been setting it up for a while. I want to start with personal background. So
Sure.
could you tell us where you were born and raised and kind of what life was like for young Stephen Mulroy?
Sure. Well, great to be here and great to have one of my prosecutors sitting in as well. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah. And then when I was 14, moved to Pensacola, Florida, really just outside Pensacola, a city called Gulf Breeze. Spent my high school years there. Always go back there for the holidays, kind of consider Pensacola home now.
Beautiful. And what about your childhood would you say geared you towards the life of the law and becoming a lawyer?
Interesting. I think when I was a kid, I was a big Star Trek fan. And Star Trek, gave a lot of messages about morals and fairness and a world order of, respect for everybody and respect for rights. And maybe that was a bit of a grounding. I continued that general interest in free speech and civil liberties in high school. When I went to college at Cornell, I was the head of the Cornell Civil Liberties Union and was really interested in civil liberties and civil rights, free speech, things of that nature. Was fascinated by the relationship between the individual and the government, and
Right.
what was the boundary between the two? When could the government regulate someone's conduct, and when did the government need to leave people alone and respect freedom? And I actually went to Cornell to become an astrophysicist.
Oh.
The Star Trek stuff got me interested in astronomy, and I wanted to be the next Carl Sagan. Do you remember Carl Sagan? Billions and billions of light years away, innumerable galaxies of the world. So I wanted to be the next Carl Sagan, and Carl Sagan was at Cornell, actually.
Oh, nice.
I soon learned that with great effort, I could be a mediocre physicist, but I was much more interested in the civil liberties stuff. And then I decided, actually what I needed to do is to go to law school. So I went to law school to do public interest work. When I got out of law school and finished my federal district court clerkship, I found a job with the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Justice Department and worked there. And then that eventually led to being a federal prosecutor, which led to me wanting to become a law professor, and that's how I got here.
That's beautiful. When you talk about civil liberties and things of that nature, is that something that's been like innately a part of your life? Like it sounds like you're kind of drawn to it. Can you kind of speak more to that and what that calling feels like?
I don't know if I can say exactly what it was about it that fascinated me so much, but from a very early age, I was always I would just bristle at rules that I thought were arbitrary, even when I was in grade school. Well, why can't you talk when you're online? I mean, we're just standing around doing anything. Why can't we talk to each other? That doesn't make any sense, So I had that instinctive resistance to rules that are arbitrary. I respected the need to enforce rules that made sense,
Right.
but the rules didn't always make sense to me.
Right.
And that led to a broader discussion of, what's the relationship between the government and the individual, and what are the dividing lines? And I took some courses at Cornell that were really interesting about civil liberties and things of that nature. And I don't know, it just seemed to me that, in law school, I'm sure they told you this, Jack, in the first year, they spent a lot of time telling you, we're going to have to teach you to think like a lawyer. And there's a special way that you think like a lawyer. Well, when I got to law school at William & Mary, I thought, I don't know any other way to think. I mean, what do you mean? Well, everyone should think this way, right? This is the way one thinks.
Right.
So I don't know, just sort of took it to it naturally.
Beautiful. And well, now you're obviously District Attorney of Memphis.
Yeah.
What was your journey going from Pensacola to here?
Well, so like I said, DOJ civil rights in Washington, D.C., and then a federal prosecutor in the Washington, D.C. area. I decided that I wanted to be a law professor. I wanted to have the flexibility to pursue side interests and also write and publish and have that count as billable hours. And I just love the natural interaction of the classroom. I kind of was a natural teacher. I like that kind of interaction. And in order to be a law professor, you have to be willing to relocate because it's very competitive.
Right.
And I got a job at Memphis. And I'd heard of Memphis, blues, Elvis, barbecue, right? What's not to like?
Yeah, exactly.
I'll go there. And I fell in love with Memphis as soon as I got here. So I was a law professor for 22 years at the University of Memphis. During that time, I'd been on the county commission for 2 terms because I was interested in public interest in public life, you know, and I did a lot of pioneering things on the county commission that I enjoyed and found fulfilling. But then finally, I thought I was done with politics. And I was just going to spend the rest of my life as a tenured law professor with summers off. It's a sweet gig. If you ever get a chance, I recommend it. It's a very nice job. But then I was recruited to run for district attorney. And the reason I was recruited was that there were many people, and myself was one of them, who thought that our criminal justice system had been way too carceral, all focused on stick and not enough carrot, and that we had had a mass incarceration binge in our country, in our state, and in our county over the last couple of decades, and we needed a course correction. Mm-hmm. And I definitely believed that. And there were people in the community who believed that and approached me and said, you know, we need someone who thinks that way, but also has relevant experience and has a chance to win in the election. And because I had been on the county commission, I have a certain amount of political experience, a certain amount of name recognition, certain amount of fundraising experience, you know, the things that you need to do to win. Right. But I also had that philosophy. And so I thought about it, and I thought, you know, here's an opportunity to make a difference where I really thought we needed to make a difference. And so I ran, and here I am.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to take a step back because I didn't know, I knew that you had experience professing. I know that was kind of like your entry point in just from research, but I want you to answer this too. Okay. Because it seems like you have a real passion for teaching. Like you said, you're kind of like a natural teacher. Yeah. What's your favorite part about pouring into the next wave of people coming through law school?
Well, so, you know, on the one hand, when you're a teacher, you don't directly affect policy or public life, right? But you do indirectly affect it because you're teaching literally thousands of lawyers over the course of my career, thousands and thousands of people, and instilled in them work ethic and honesty and, you know, maybe an approach to life. You know, you would like to think you have some sort of positive influence on them. So there's that. But I just also enjoyed the interaction. You know, Jack could tell you we would have good discussions, you know. And in law school, we've got something called the Socratic dialogue method. So I would cold call on people. I'd say, Mr. Gould, you know, what does the case say and what do you think about that? And then I'd say, well, what do you think? Or what's the counter argument? And I'd get a discussion going. And I just, you know, just took to that naturally. When I was a law student, the law professor who was my mentor, who basically helped me get into law academia, used to say that I took a lot of his classes and I would sort of naturally take on that role. Like during class discussions, I'd say, well, wait a minute, no, I don't think Jack and Sue, I don't think what you're saying is inconsistent. I think we can synthesize them. And the professor said, I love that about you because then I could sit back and just sort of enjoy the discussion, maybe even get involved in it myself because I knew you were handling the, you know, facilitation part of it. So I enjoyed that. I think it was a chance to have, hope, a positive influence on literally thousands of future lawyers, right, who themselves are disproportionately influential on government and policy. But at the same time, I wanted to have a more direct, hands-on approach. So I did a lot of pro bono litigation, you know, what we call impact litigation, where you're suing to change the way the government does something. And then I was on the county commission. So I, you know, rolled up my sleeves and actually got involved in the dirty business of politics. And then after 22 years, it seemed like maybe I ought to make a change and get involved in a permanent way. And this DA race just sort of came at the right time.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think...
if I may real quick, Matt, on the teaching aspect, I'm glad you made that decision. And real quick, as to the cold calling, I actually think most professors told me to, Jack, just put your hand out. You know, but I will say one thing about DA is that when he was a professor, he mastered the art of neutrality, right? We all have our views, and that's fine, that's great, you know, we're humans. But what he kind of hinted at here is he would present a topic, and, you know, he would get the discussion going, and he would just step back. He would allow us as future lawyers and future people dealing with one another in the world to say that our point, your point, this point, that point, and to ultimately, as you mentioned, kind of reach a conclusion or or just leave it at that, because maybe not everybody's going to agree all the time. But I never felt uncomfortable speaking in your class, and I've even sent you texts saying thank you for allowing us to have that discussion today, because that's how we make change, and that's how we make the best society possible. So
Yeah, and I think it mirrors a lot of like what social work is. So like in my role, one of my favorite things is, or the reason why, when everyone asks me, why would you want to do social work? I mean, it's a really thankless position, very similar to y'all's, and a lot of the time you are working in the most traumatic situations possible. But I very much mirror that thought of, to me, the ability to pour into someone else and then see that work extend beyond that individual is something that is super impactful to me, because you might be touching one individual, but that person touches another person.
Absolutely.
And then it's an echo chamber.
Absolutely.
So it really is beautiful to see. But I do have a question about him as a
By
professor.
the way, I would say I think social work is even more thankless than the law. I mean, social work is absolutely essential, but I have so much respect for people who are willing to do the work of social work, because, hard work is stressful, but I don't think it holds a candle to social work.
And could I speak on that real quick,
Yeah.
Matt? And Dia, Matt started kind of driving those hub cars around and looking for people to help and things like that. Honorable work. And one time I did one shift with him, the graveyard shift at the warming center. So, when it gets below freezing and they open that up, which is amazing. I wish we had those everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I did the graveyard shift with him, and Dia Mulroy, I'm telling you, nothing against the people, right? People were getting sick on the floor, using the restroom on the floor, fights and all that kind of stuff. And Matthew is incredible. He kept his cool, made sure people got the food they needed and got the help they needed. But to speak on your point about it being a thankless job, it's a very tough job, but Matthew handles it very well.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think one of the things when it comes to the intersection between the work that y'all do and the work that we do is that individuals undergoing y'all's processes generally end up back at our front doorstep, either post-incarceration or through a diversion program. One of the things I wanted to say about the work you're doing that I personally see is the amount of individuals that have been able to connect with us for a diversion tactic. And that's been amazing, especially in the younger population. We've had a few different conversations with Tamika Williams and an individual named Josh Webster that does Code for America. His targeted population is opportunity youth 16 to 24. And then Tamika's obviously doing these new initiatives with things like Courageous Conversations, talking about gun violence, and all these different, touch points for this population. I really understand your thought pattern. When you're going in and you're interacting with these different populations, what is your approach when you are either doing a policy change or when you're looking at these various, as you said, kind of like suing to change litigations? What is your thought pattern behind that? What's the ultimate goal behind each of your new initiatives?
Right. Overall, the data from around the country, over and over again, if there's one thing that criminologists agree on, and there's not a lot that they agree on, is that in order to be effective, punishment needs to be swift and certain, but it need not be severe. Another thing that the data shows is that when you engage in rehabilitative interventions to try to figure out what are the underlying problems that person has, is it drug abuse, is it alcoholism, is it mental illness, is it simply homelessness, a lack of job skills so that maybe job training can get them on their feet. When you do those kinds of interventions, the recidivism rate goes down, the repeat offense rate goes down. And so I take those two things as the two pillars and then try to craft policies that work with that. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, if it is not just a low-level offense, a lot of what you're talking about are quality of life offenses, mm-hmm. People that are just constantly using drugs and public urination and vagrancy and drunken disorderly or
mm-hmm.
Disorderly conduct, things like that. There's low-level offenses that are crying out for rehabilitative interventions, right? At the more serious level, there is a role for incarceration. If someone, especially if they're violent, or even if they're non-violent, but it's repeat offenses. Like the 15th shoplifting,
right.
Arrest. So there is a role for straight incarceration, but we don't need to just. The sentence length isn't as important as the perception on the part of the would-be criminal that there is a likelihood that they will get caught. Mm-hmm. And that they will receive some sentence.
Yeah.
And even with those people that are doing the more serious crimes or the lower level crimes, but they're doing it for the 10th time,
yep.
even there is a space for rehabilitative intervention, because there's probably something going on in their lives too, that if we could address that, then it would be less likely to do the repeat offending down the line. Everyone likes to talk about the revolving door of the criminal justice system, and what they're talking about is what they could perceive to be overlenience in bail, right? And although I think that argument is overstated, there are some instances. I mean, there are these individual cases where we think, oh my God, the judge has been too lenient with bail. That is true. But the revolving door that we don't talk about enough is the revolving door at the other end of the criminal justice system, where we lock these people up, we don't try to address the underlying problems, and then as soon as they get out, they immediately revert to the only life they've ever known, which is life on the street. And unless we do that, we're not really going to get a handle on our crime problem.
Absolutely. And first off, that's extremely refreshing to hear from someone in a powerful position like yourself, because one of the key things that especially the youth side stuff that I work on, is I won't say badge of honor, but the amount of times that I've had people like print out their rap sheet or have to go to 201 for a follow-up thing, and it's like 16 pages long, and it's all like minor offenses. But then at like the 10th, 15th time, I'm like, hey, dude, do you want to be doing this? Like, you're telling me that you're upset you have to go to anger management class. That's court ordered. But at the same time, you also have a list of things that you've done that you've been caught for and that you continue to do after having these interventions. And so to hear you have that point of view with the pillars and understanding that all the different parts of an individual's life play into the reasons why they're doing something. And if we don't attack that, then we're not really doing our jobs.
And it's not only the more humane thing to do, it's also the more effective thing to do.
Correct. And I think incarceration for me, like, I don't know if he's talked about our father's background. My dad used to run the federal courts for around 25 years. So we kind of grew up around law. And that population's always intrigued me. It's funny, my two biggest fears growing up were like storms, but also being incarcerated. The thought of it just terrifies me, that having no agency, no autonomy, no ability to kind of maneuver how you want to. And so I started doing work with reentry. And one of the things we're pushing for is getting these kiosks in different, 201 and then a few other areas to have individuals be able to have case management prior to exiting incarceration. Because one of the biggest things we see at our front doorstep all the time is someone literally walking up in flip-flops being like, the officer told me to come here. I just got out of 201. I don't have an ID. I don't know where to go. And those intervention points are really, really key, and that's something that we're working on now and I'm really excited about. But speaking kind of to that, I do want to back up about your day-to-day. I think the DA is like a job people hear about, and they know you're a lawyer. They know that you have some sort of hand in policy making, but no one really truly understands it. One of my favorite shows is called Billions, and one of the people is Chuck Rhodes on that. So can you kind of speak to the difference between the, cinematic approach to the DA versus the reality of what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Yeah. Well, all the stuff you see on TV, my job is even more glamorous. No, not at all. So in a large jurisdiction like mine, my day-to-day is really just managing. I'm not in court myself because I have got 120 lawyers that are in the courtrooms, right? So Jack is in courtroom every day. I have made court appearances, from time to time in important cases, but mostly what I do is manage the staff and then try to figure out, what kind of priorities the office is going to have. What offenses are we focused on? What types of settlements and plea agreements are we going to be open to? How we can move cases through the system quicker? How we can fold in rehabilitative interventions into our everyday work, how we can make better use of body camera footage, and how we can make better use of forensic crime testing to prove our cases. These are all higher level management things. And then I also have to worry about interacting with other government agents, working with the judges, working with the public defender's office, managing upwards to the state government. I've done a lot of that lately. So that's kind of what I do day to day. In terms of the role of the DA, so the judge makes the final decision about what happens with the case. Right? There's a lot of confusion about bail, and when they think that the DA sets bail, no, the judge sets bail. Right? But where the DA comes in is the DA has extremely broad discretion. in deciding which cases to bring in the first place, right? Because we don't have the ability, we don't have the resources or the manpower to fully prosecute all of the cases that are brought to us. We just can't do it.
Right.
So we have to pick and choose what we're going to prioritize. So some will dismiss, some will, take to trial, some we will settle. And we have very broad discretion in deciding what to do with that. And that means on an individual case, we have a lot of influence on what will happen to that defendant. Now, ultimately, the final decision is the judge's. But if the prosecutor and the defense lawyer can agree to a certain outcome, almost always the judge is going to sign off on that. So that's where people like Jack and me really have influence. We don't write the laws, we just enforce them. We don't make the final decision, the judge does that. But in that intermediate space, we get to decide which cases to bring forward and how we are willing to settle those cases.
Yeah, and I think you just spoke to one of the things I'm really interested about, especially when it comes to public office. I think a lot of times public officials tend to be doing things that have tremendous reason and logic behind them, but the approach that's being taken is skewed in the public light. So like example would be like if I were a judge and I know an individual's a repeat offender, and so instead of using diversion tactic, I try to either implement instead of giving him a large sentencing, I try to implement some sort of diversion structure because I understand more details of the case than anyone in the public would. How do you combat that or deal with it on your day-to-day or in your personal life when it comes to, like, is this something you just accept? Like, do you just accept not everyone's going to accept what I'm doing and that's just part of the job? Or how do you work through that?
If you are a district attorney, inherent in that job is every decision you make, someone's going to be unhappy, right?
Right.
No matter what you do, somebody's going to get mad at you. That's true for judges too. But there seems to be more focus on the DA. The DA is sort of a higher profile job.
Definitely.
And so I knew going into it that any DA is going to be subject to public criticism, and people are going to get mad. Some people are going to like what they do, some not. And that goes double for someone like me, where I decided to come in specifically on a reform agenda. Like I did not want to just keep doing what had been done before. I definitely wanted to change direction of the office. And I knew that was going to trigger some pushback as well. I think what I didn't anticipate is this actual effort by one state senator to actually have me removed from office because he thought I was pushing too much reform. That I did not see coming, and that was a little bit of an unpleasant surprise.
Definitely.
Can I speak?
Yeah.
And as to that, just real quick, you have been getting a bit of a bad rap, but as someone who's kind of in the trenches, if you will, I'm here to tell everybody that we take every case very seriously, and every case is a completely different circumstance. Right. And as someone doing the work, doing the trial, doing the hearing, we're not light. We're not going light. We take it very seriously, and we're pursuing, as you said, kind of on that totem pole, as violence and severity increases, so does our intensity. And so I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. And also, Matt, to your point about the misconception with the public, you also have to realize, too, that we're dealing with humans, and sometimes crimes against family members. For example, I had the police were called when two siblings were kind of in a spat, for example, hitting each other. No criminal history, but the police were called, and that was brought before us. That was a report. And so we kind of have to step back and call our victims and be like, this is your brother. How would you like this handled? And, so the human element impacts a lot of our decisions too, because it's difficult when you have uncooperative witnesses who don't want to come to court. And then you may have to issue an instanter, or do we want to do that? Or say they changed their mind? Do we want to charge them with false offense report?
Explain what an instanter is.
An instanter is if someone is, I apologize, so an instanter is, so say you are a victim of a crime, or a witness, or an officer, and you're subpoenaed to come to court to testify. And a subpoena is a court order. Jack, come to court on this date to testify about this. And if you ignore that, we are within our rights to have an instanter, a warrant issued for your arrest to get you to court.
Got it.
So that's what an instanter is. It's a pretty intense tactic. You're taking someone from their job. You may have no criminal history. They're just like, no, I'm afraid. I don't want to do this. Or no, that's my brother. I don't want to come. So it's, I can't say I used it often on unserious cases.
Right.
And that may be inappropriate. I'm happy to be reprimanded and change that, but I use it when it's like, no, this guy killed someone and we don't want him back on the streets.
Yeah.
So that all varies too. It's a variable game.
I think it akins a lot to like the work that we do, right? When we have on our banners, we're working to end homelessness, and then we will get someone like we say we house all these individuals, we're doing all these great things, and then we'll still hear like, oh, I drove down Poplar and I saw someone in a tent outside. It's like we're working to that goal, but then people also don't understand the approach that we take. We take a very human-centric approach, very much like y'all are talking about. Meaning, I don't go up to someone that's sleeping outside and say, pack up your stuff. We're going over here. You're going to the shelter. You're doing this. No, we say, what can I help you with? What would you like the outcome to be? If you tell me you want to be sleeping outside, that is your personal choice. You have personal agency, and it's not on me to tell you how to live your life. So I think there's a really good like approach that it seems as if y'all take the human-centric approach like we do.
Question.
Yeah.
What is it about the public in general, social media or whatnot? Why is it
social media.
always thought of as something's always simple? You can just do it. You can just do it, man. You can just take them and put them in housing, or you could just wave your hand and you can change and do something. You can just do it. And like, what is that about?
So there's a natural intuition that if you want to stop somebody from doing something, you come down hard.
Mm-hmm.
And if that doesn't work, then you come down even harder. And every time something doesn't work, the instinct is, well, we've got to lock more people up then, and we've got to lock them up for longer. Well, if that didn't work, all right, let's lock them up even longer.
Yep.
And, the experience of the last couple of decades has showed that hadn't worked. It clearly didn't work in Shelby County, where for the last decade before I took over, violent crime had been steadily increasing to record levels. At the record levels for the 2 years before I even took over. But that's a natural instinct.
Right.
Now, I think there are some people in the public that don't know any better, but I think there are also some politicians and media organizations that do know better, but they play that up anyway, all right, because it gets ratings for the media, and it gets, political following for certain politicians, so they will deliberately exploit that, and they will say, look, this person was charged with X, but now he's out on bail, that therefore it must be terrible. Or look, this person was convicted of Y, but he didn't get the death penalty, he only got life. Or he didn't get 30 years, he only got 20 years. That must mean that we're being soft on crime.
Yeah.
That message can resonate. And now I think there were a lot of people, at least in Shelby County, who were tired of that, because otherwise I wouldn't have been elected.
Correct.
Right? But I think there are people in the media and politicians who deliberately push that narrative because it gets people excited, it gets people outraged, and that means clicks and likes and ratings, and it means attention for the right kind of politicians. And then there are some ordinary citizens that just don't know any better.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is we have to do two things. And Jack already mentioned this, we have to make sure the public understands we're not letting violent criminals out. We are in fact doing the day-to-day job. We are putting people away when they are repeat offenders or when they were violent offenders. We are definitely doing that. We are not as has been caricatured. But at the same time, I think we also need to put in an extra word to say, although we are doing that, you should also know that locking people up longer isn't always the answer. Sometimes we need to do other approaches, and that's why you elected us to do the case-by-case analysis that Jack is talking about.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the clickbait culture that we live in. It's really, it's sick, but it's also true that like whenever you put something on social media, you're going to get 10x the likes or the comments or whatever, the engagement, if it's some title that reads some boisterous, oh my goodness, this is awful, over like, hey, look at the great work the DA is doing.
Right.
People will skip over that title, but as soon as you hear something negative or bad, people want to hop on that bandwagon. It's an echo chamber.
Quick and easy.
Quick and easy, yeah. And it's the new day and age that we live in. And, that's actually part of why we do this, because we think that there's a real niche and gap in positive posting. It's just like, why is that?
Matt, can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Because we seem to be on the same page about these other options instead of incarceration.
Definitely.
But are you planning to get further invested, or co-partnered with the district attorney's office with the hub and things like that? Because I know you said you have what seems to be not inpatient, but these young kids are living with you. And for me, when I put someone on diversion or probation, I want them to succeed, and I never want to see them again. I want them to have a good life, have kids, get a job, go to soccer practice, all that. I never want to see them again.
Right.
And a lot of the issue is that we'll do the Shelby County Office of Reentry, we'll do this, we'll do that, but they're going back to that kind of that same place, those same friends, they're seeing the same things, and you don't have to answer this now, but I would love to get more involved with programs like yours where we can actually house these individuals, not against their will or anything, because they don't have to do anything, it's their choice, but just to give them the best chance that they can to succeed. I was just curious, are you working on that, or is that a possibility?
I'm always working on it. I'm always looking at new initiatives and different things that we could do for this population. But one of the things I will speak to as far as like what we currently do with Hub Hall and why we have a 92% success rate through Hub Hall of individuals staying housed for up to 2 years. And then we've only ever had to remove 7 individuals, only 2 of which those were for violent acts in the home. Mm-hmm. The other 5 were for like sneaking someone in or, bringing alcohol or something like that. And that was after multiple times of trying not to have them kicked out. But the approach that we take, and what I see a lot when it comes to reform and programming, is that people have a predetermined destination for individuals before they even enter into the program. So in other words, say you have an individual for diversion and you say, I'm going to put you in this workforce development program. A lot of workforce development programs nationwide have a predetermined exit for an individual. What people don't realize is that when you do that, you take autonomy and agency outside of the individual, and you're more creating a product. So when you're working with people, the hardest thing to do is to get them to buy into the thing that you're doing. The easiest thing to do, and what most people don't do, is to be there to shepherd them towards whatever goal they determine is success for them. So I'll share with you an individual named Greg, who we're going to be interviewing very soon. Greg had spent 3 years in 201 Poplar for aggravated assault and arson on an apartment complex. So you can imagine if you have on your record that you burned down an apartment complex, it's very hard to get housed. He came to us. He was a couple months sober. When he had that face value of someone that like most people would be intimidated by. He knew that. He hated it. Sitting down with him and for the first time in his life, asking him what he wanted to do was his most impactful point in our program. Hey, what does success look like to you? Oh, well, I got to do this for probation. I got to do that. Things that he was anxious about and terrified of, like getting an ID or getting into these different things, we solved in a week. And I went to his probation meetings with him. I walked into the Office of Reentry and I said, hey, to DeAndre, and I talked to Calvin Walker, and I said, hey, this guy's with us, just so you know. Let me know what he needs. We'll knock it out. I'll get it back to you. So he had, I forgot what they call it, but where you decrease the amount of supervision. He had that within 2 months of being with us. Nice. But then from that point, you say, okay, we knocked out these things that we're super anxious about. What else do you want to do? I want to get my GED because I think that opens up more job opportunities for me. Okay, great. How do we do that? Connect him with Hope Works. And then he graduates from Hope Works, gives a speech. And he mentions us, and he does all these beautiful things. So Greg is an example, and he's currently working, just got a CDL licensure literally 2 days ago, texted me a picture at the DMV being like, hey, I'm turning this in, let's go, I'm so proud. A shout out to Portia Richardson with TRAP. That's an amazing program if y'all haven't heard of that or connected with her. Yeah. She's amazing, and she connected him with a job and job training and all this beautiful stuff. But people have this notion, especially with the younger population, that they are lazy, they don't want to work, and they're unmotivated. That's not true. In the slightest. They have no idea where to go. Right. They don't know where to start. And so when you have a predetermined exit with a lot of these different programs, what you're really doing is making a product that they don't want to be. But they'll do it because they don't want to be in 201, or they'll do it because they don't want to be back in a courtroom hearing about something else. But the reason why you keep seeing a high recidivism rate is because those activities that we're talking about, hanging out with the wrong crowd, being in those wrong areas, that's comfortable to them. Right. So what we think is comfortable, what I think is comfortable, like getting a GED or all this beautiful stuff, to them that feels like work, and it feels like something that's outside of who they truly are. So they escape back to these negative consequences.
What do you mean by the predetermined exit? I'm not quite sure.
So with a lot of programming, it will be to a specific exit in the sense of like, if we do workforce development, like you're going to get this exact thing and go work for this company. And they'll take that because it's kind of the only option they have. It's either like that, or I know a lot of people will have different versions of that. But when it comes to the housing and how we're able to catch them, because we're like an all-encompassing program. So part of housing is getting a job and getting a GED and all these different things. We work through different options, provide a lot more, I would say, we provide them with a platter full of options, allow them to choose.
I see.
And so like with someone like Greg, who had really been programmed his whole life, or individuals coming out of DCS care, that's like 70% of our folks are coming through youth villages. And I've literally had people cry because we don't take their phones. Or I've had people tear up when they have a room to themselves for the first time in their entire life. And so when we see these things and we give them the autonomy and choice, it also takes away their ability to have someone to combat against. So in their lives, they've always had people that it's like, this awful person that was my case manager, this person that was over my, you know, my work, I can combat against them. When you give them the autonomy and the choice, they only have themselves to blame if it doesn't work out. And we see that all the time. We see people try and fail. But as I said, I spoke at a workforce engagement a few months back. I would rather you sit in my program and try and fail 1,000 different things than for you to go into something that you absolutely hate that you're going to quit. And it's what we're doing right now with workforce development. I just rolled out Hub University. And part of that is not focusing on individuals' capacity to do a specific role, but increasing their interpersonal skills to be successful in any workplace. Because we did surveys around 200 people, 98% of individuals had lost income due to their inability to handle a stressful workplace environment. They didn't know how to communicate with the boss. They didn't know that I shouldn't say this about my coworker in front of them, or these things that we all have inherently
Take for granted.
Right.
take for granted daily.
Yeah.
And so the youth population, a lot of what we program and what we hope to do in the future with like transitional housing for reentry folks is focusing on giving autonomy and agency back to them and then more shepherding them towards whatever idea of success they have. Because then it's really their idea. It's their journey. It's their success. And that's also what I mean when I say predetermined exit. When it comes to different programs, a lot of the time people will have to have certain things hit for them to either get grant money or to be able to have the statistics they have, which
Right.
totally understand and totally
Right.
appreciate, and it's
Right.
needed. But when you're able to approach it the way we do, where it's like, no, like you could exit back into Job Corps, you
I get
could
it.
move back in.
That's great.
So those are our goals right now, and that's what we are focusing on, and it's something that's really like close to the entire mission of the hub in general. But like I told you, I see the work you're doing echo into the individuals that we work with, just simply off the fact of I've seen people with very long histories that are still able to get sent over to us or be connected to us, which tells me, okay, let's actually make this one count and let's do what we need to do. And Greg's now housed, has custody of his children back, and is sober
great.
over 2.5 years.
That's a great story.
That's really what we're trying to gear towards. But a lot of what you spoke on, and a question I have that I think is pertinent to the conversation is, your office requires a lot of trust between the community that you serve and then the work that you're doing. What strategies do you see being successful, or do you implement to increase that trust and make sure that people understand you are doing it for the benefit of the community, not to be some arbitrary person over there like making laws and just locking people up?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's all about community engagement and our communication strategy. So, I have a communications director who helps me with the public messaging. We have a website, we have social media posts, we put out press releases, we try to get our message out through the media. And then I also have someone who handles community engagement. And so not only me, but other members of the community, might go out and talk to community groups, and establish relationships with those groups and have liaisons with those groups so that everyone understands what it is we're trying to do and that we can also get input from them. So I have a clergy advisory group that I meet with quarterly. I tell them what we're doing, they give me input, and I have a general DA's advisory group composed of business leaders and community organization leaders that I meet with quarterly for the same purpose. We're always trying to get input from the community and hear what their concerns are, but also trying to affirmatively put our message out. And like I said earlier, the message is twofold. One, we are doing the work.
Right.
Reassure the public that we understand that crime is a problem, violent crime in particular, repeat offenders in particular, but also try to shine a light on the fact that there are other methods from just the traditional lock them up, throw away the key that we are doing and are working. And these things have been proven to work around the country, and we're doing them here and we're working. So, we have this meaningful supervision initiative where Jack knows about this, where In cases where someone might be probation eligible, we don't just do probation. We figure out what it is that they need. Is it job training? Is it a GED? Is it substance abuse? And we fold that into the to the plea agreement. So that's where you're getting a lot of these referrals. Office for Reentry is getting a lot of these referrals. We have the V11 initiative, where we're putting special focus on certain types of violent and violent-associated offenses, moving them through the system quicker, being tougher on bail, being more robust in our investigations. We're doing all these things. We need to let the public know that we're doing them and then get some feedback.
Yeah, and sometimes the
Could
feedback's
I,
the hardest part.
Bolster that a little bit, Matt?
Yeah.
And, D.A. Mulroy, he's not coming out to these podcasts and things and just saying these and then going and kicking his feet up. Like when I get a file and it's a serious case, the V11 case, there's a V11 sheet that I fill out and I submit to our investigators so that I know if that person is ever rearrested, I get a ping immediately. So we're like, he's being serious. We're tracking on these individuals. And then also for the meaningful probation, he's not just saying that and then he tells us to do it and then, maybe we will, maybe we won't. We're actually tracking it. We're tracking how many individuals that we are doing this for. So back to the trust, D.A. Mulroy is holding the DA's office accountable, and I think that helps with the trust with the community.
Definitely.
So I just want to make you aware.
And that was my next question, because I think I was really intrigued by your response to what you do day to day. I did not envision a lot of what you do being managing 120 different lawyers, which, hey, kudos. I've managed 7 people before this new role, and that was stressful enough. So 120. What aspects of leadership do you try to instill in the people under your leadership?
Lead by example.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So don't ask people to do things that you're not willing to do yourself. Be accessible. I have an open door policy. And try to make sure that I poke my head up every now and then and go down into the courtroom, down into the offices, see what's going on, so that there's lines of communication open between me and the troops.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be doing another training session very soon for all the lawyers. Kind of a reset, like let's go over again, what is the philosophy, what is it we're trying to do, how can we best do it, and take questions, so that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's beautiful. When Jack said that he was texting, I was like, you can text the DA? And he was like, yeah, dude, I talk to him all the time.
He usually ignores me, that's all right.
That's not true.
But I really appreciate the work you do. And like you said, like both of our positions typically go either unthanked or unnoticed. But as someone who interacts with the population that has come through your systems, I definitely see an effective change. And I'm looking forward to continuous collaboration amongst the different entities.
I appreciate you saying that. Earlier you said, when I first was telling you about my philosophies, that you said you were glad to hear that from an elected official or a government official. And I almost interjected, it's particularly important that it is the DA that is saying that, because the traditional view of the DA's role is the DA is supposed to be the lock them up, throw away the key guy. The DA's job is to go after everybody as aggressively as possible and seek the maximum, the fullest extent of the law, right? Everyone says that. And that other kind of stuff, that's the role of the public defender, or it's the role of the social worker, or it's the role of maybe some other government official. But it's not supposed to be the DA that says that. But the whole point of the progressive prosecutor movement, the reform prosecutor movement that I'm a part of, the whole reason why I ran is it is precisely the DA that needs to be saying that, because it is precisely the DA that has the broad discretion and the power and the ability to decide what to do in these cases. And so if you really want to be effective, you have to have the DA being the person who is saying, hey, we do need to be concerned about mass incarceration. We do need to be concerned about rehabilitation. Because if the DA isn't on board, then it's not going to happen.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the elected official portion of it, that the reason why I said that was because I think a lot of times, at least in my experience, which I'm not super political, I try to stay away from it just because I work with individuals daily from all different walks of life. So there's no point in putting it in my brain. But it is refreshing. It was refreshing to hear that the central point behind all of your different initiatives and the work that you're doing and how you approach the law in general aligns with things that you also ran on. And it's because, like you said earlier, a lot of people will use the issues other people are experiencing or different troubles or tribulations happening within a population to bolster their own political recognition. And I think that's disgusting, because at the end of the day, being in a public office is also a position of public servantry. So to hear you say that and to see the line it was really refreshing because it's not always the case.
And what the DA was talking about with kind of the mentality too, I feel like a lot of people expect prosecutors and the DA to, get a police report and say, okay, this says this person committed this crime, and I'm going to go full bore and, no questions asked. But our objective is not to win; it's for justice, and that can take many different forms. Sometimes winning and justice align, and that's great. But they don't always do that, and sometimes justice might be simply mending a broken relationship, or getting a family back together, or getting someone help. So I just want to make the public aware that our goal is justice here, and it may not always mean just full bore head, mindless zombies for certain things.
Yeah. It's like what I said with letting an individual have autonomy over their exit plan. I've had people that return back to their families, and that's like the biggest win for me. Like we had a youth that was pregnant and had a preacher father out in Texas, and he said, "Get out of my house." He didn't know that she ended up in Memphis in a program for people experiencing homelessness. And when I called him, he was a completely send her home and started pouring out on the phone. So I think that you can't go in with a predetermined exit, especially in the work that y'all do.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the conversation about all of this. It's been really intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time for you got
I
one.
got a question.
Okay.
Okay, this question centers around AI.
Oh, I knew it was coming.
I feel, and what I'm trying to use AI and applying to the hub is to study quantitative and qualitative data around situations around homelessness and try to use that to analyze that to find innovative solutions quicker than a person could do. My question is, do you think that is anything in the future as far as like the data, would you guys see what all the other organizations you work with see? Because it sounds like this mass incarceration thing, I kind of think that's like a threat to national security. If you have a large population, you're just growing that. It's just unsustainable. Do you think there's any way of applying strategically AI, emerging AI technology to study this information? Or have you seen anything around that to where it could possibly be used to develop new innovative solutions that humans just can't see?
So in order to be, state of the art, we need to be aware of AI and its uses. So we're already using AI in terms of our legal research, and that's just a product that has become available. I've been in talks with some local people who were actually offering their services for free as a public service to help us use AI to search through more quickly the thousands of hours of body cam footage and pole cam footage and dash cam footage that we have to go through in order to identify those portions that are really relevant to save time for the prosecutors. Also, the same thing with jail calls, using AI to go through the jail calls and figure out that we monitor in V11 cases and identify the most relevant parts of those. So we're already moving towards using AI to make our jobs more efficient. Now, in terms of the quantitative data analysis, that's probably a little bit further down the road, but I think it's definitely something that's going to come eventually.
Yeah, John's really immersed in AI. I'm trying to get my feet into it, but boy, is it confusing. But it's also scary at the same time. But we'll end on some lighthearted stuff that we mentioned earlier. So the first question, I think I know your answer after our pre-podcast discussion, but you find yourself on a deserted island. You only have 3 movies to bring with you for the rest of your life. Which ones are they?
Wow. So if you would just ask me what my favorite movies were, that would have been easier. Because my favorite movies of all time are Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Kidding, okay.
And, I'm a science fiction fan. I gotta love that. The Sting.
Okay.
And Amadeus.
Nice.
Amadeus was the movie version of the play about the life of Amadeus and the rivalry between Salieri and Amadeus. And for whatever reasons, I just love those movies. But if I was on a desert island, I think I'd want to pick long movies.
Yes.
Right?
Thank you for approaching it logically. First person to do this. Thank you.
So I'm going to have to think of what are movies that are good that are really, really long. I mean, could I pick a TV series?
I'm not opposed. If you want to throw in a TV series and then one movie, I'll do that.
Okay. So all-time favorite TV shows, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The West Wing, and The Wire. So I think I would probably pick one of those, whichever one was longest,
Yes.
Okay.
right, to occupy my
Yeah.
mind on the desert islands, and then I don't know. I think I'd probably throw in Close Encounters anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I'm about to start The Wire. I've had way too many people tell me to watch it, so I'm glad that you mentioned it. What are your three? I'm actually curious about this.
So I would probably do Interstellar.
Ooh.
Great one.
Can I do the full series of Lord of the Rings as one?
That's fine. We'll count
All
that
Yeah,
as one.
yeah.
Lord of the Rings. And this is pretty basic, but I'll just go ahead and throw Harry Potter in there too, because that could build some time. I wouldn't want to do a show like Lost, because that hit home a little too.
Yeah, that would be a tough scene.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Castaway with Tom
Yeah,
Hanks.
no.
Definitely not on the list.
No.
PTSD there.
And then for both of you, you're writing an autobiography, and then you have to title it today. What do you think your title would be?
Otherwise engaged.
Otherwise engaged.
I'm always busy with something else.
Yeah. Shoot. Oh man, shoot. I don't know. I'm gonna quote, what's that movie? Roundhouse. Opinions vary. That's what
Opinions vary.
Opinions vary.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate the time. I appreciate y'all coming on. This was a really fun time. I would love to do follow-ups with any new initiatives or stuff going on or anything you guys want to announce, or just if you want to come back and we can have more meaningful conversations. I really appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
Matt.
you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.